Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I see some folks are coming into the chat. Um, my name is Sela, and my pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Paulina to talk about language interpretation services, which are available for today. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to her so she can talk a little bit more about those instructions.
Gracias, Cela. I will do this part in Spanish. Las instrucciones van a ser en español. Tenemos interpretación en vivo disponible durante toda esta presentación. Si se conecta a través de una computadora, busque el globo terráqueo que se encuentra normalmente al pie de la pantalla y seleccione el idioma español. Si se conecta a través de un teléfono o una tableta, hay que buscar el menú de los tres puntitos, las reticencias, luego buscar interpretación, seleccionar el idioma español y finalizar. Done en inglés. Muchas gracias. Avísenos, por favor, en el chat caso no pueda encontrar o acceder a la función de interpretación. Gracias.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Paulina. I do also see someone raised their hand. Let me see if I'm able to. Hi, Demise. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Sorry, it looks like there was a tech issue right there. My apologies. So again, welcome everyone to our QCorner chat with Oasis Legal Services for today. I'm going to go ahead and share a link in the chat. It is a short pre-training survey for folks to fill out. It's anonymous and it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. And it helps us so that we can continue offering these chats and trainings as well. Let's see. All right. So I put that in the chat. So just follow the link. And if there are any questions you do not feel comfortable answering, please feel free to skip over them. And again, my name is Sela. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. Thank you again for joining us for the QCorner chat with Oasis Legal Services around the current state of LGBTQ plus asylum in the United States. So while y'all are filling out the survey, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our lovely presenters for today, Maria and Rachel.
Thanks, Ella. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, TheQCorner, for having us today. I'm Maria Elena Paniagua. I'm the Asylum Program Director at Oasis Legal Services. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joined by our Director of Programs and Advocacy, Rachel Cafele. And today we're going to talk about what's going on with asylum and updates. And so we'll get started. Let me share our presentation. So I want to start off just by giving a brief overview of who we are and what services we're able to provide. So we help people apply for asylum in the United States. So asylum provides people protection from deportation. With a pending asylum application, our clients are able to receive a work permit and Social Security number, and it opens the doors for them to be able to pursue personal and professional goals. Once someone gets granted asylum, a year later, they can apply for their permanent residency. And by applying for permanent residency, they're getting more protection from deportation. And they're able to also petition for family members. And then the last step in the immigration journey is then to apply for citizenship. So 5 years after someone gets the permanent residency, they can then apply to become a U.S. citizen. And we make sure that our clients are connected to all the resources they need to be able to achieve that goal, which is like connecting them to English classes, civics, tutoring, and knowledge of accurate tax preparation guidelines. So to prepare them for being able to apply for citizenship, passing their interviews, and then also learning about the responsibilities as U.S. citizens. And lastly, we also provide social services because we understand that, you know, there's different things going on in our clients' life, not just focusing on their immigration matters, but also, you know, they may be facing housing and food insecurity. So we want to make sure we are addressing all of our clients' needs. So by providing mental health services, we provide direct referrals, and this provides a better outcome, not just for their immigration cases, but in general for their quality of life. And so we provide tailored referrals. We have updated guides that we give out to clients and support our high acuity clients experiencing homelessness, domestic violence, and other crises. So since opening our doors in 2017, we have been able to represent over 2,700 LGBTQ plus folks from 68 different countries. We have won asylum for hundreds of clients, while hundreds still remain in the backlog waiting for their cases to be heard. Because of the strength of the cases we take and because of our expertise, we have a 99% success rate. Over 60% of our clients are non-English speakers. And in 2024, out of the 322 clients we served, 11 identified as trans or non-binary, 93% are Latina, 88% live at the 200 or below poverty guideline, and 1 out of 5 are living with HIV. So that was just a quick overview of like the services we provide, who our clients are. And next, we're going to dive into like the reason why we're here today. So we're going to go over asylum. So what is asylum? Review the law and how it is that LGBTQ plus folks are eligible to apply. Then we're going to talk about barriers for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers. So what are the obstacles they are facing even without the current administration's hostility? And then lastly, we'll be going over updates and other, not just for asylum, but other immigration updates and how to better protect our communities and ourselves during current times. So what is asylum? So asylum was established under the 1951 Refugee Convention. So after World War II, it was joined by the global community, which defined who is a refugee. And in the US, people who meet the definition of a refugee are eligible to apply for asylum in the United States. So who is a refugee? So we're using refugee, but the term refugee and asylum applicant or asylees are used interchangeably. So a refugee is a person who fears returning to their home country, is unwilling or unable to seek the protection of their home government, has suffered past persecution or has a well-founded fear of future persecution on account of one of the 5 protected grounds, which is their race, religion, gender, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So how is it that LGBTQ plus folks are eligible to apply for asylum? It all comes down to the particular social group. And the particular social group has to meet 3 factors, which are, we are outlining them here. First is the immutable or fundamental characteristic. So members of the group cannot change or should not be required to change because the characteristic is fundamental to their individual identities or consciousness. Social distinct, the group is perceived as a group by society and treated distinctly. And lastly, particular, the group is defined in a manner sufficiently distinct that the group would be recognized in society in question as a discrete class of persons. So for our clients, it comes down to the particular social group. So immigration has established that sexual orientation and gender identity minorities and people living with HIV constitute a particular social group. So examples of that are lesbian woman from El Salvador, or transgender men from Mexico, or gay men living with HIV from Guatemala. So there's just some examples of particular social groups and how it is that, you know, people are able to apply for asylum based on their sexual orientations and their gender identities, or because they're living with HIV. And before I continue, sorry, I forgot to put this at the beginning. We're going to be saving all the questions for the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat room and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So benefits of applying for asylum, it's a permanent status to live and work in the United States. Asylum is indefinite unless, you know, you commit serious crimes that might put you in danger of having your status revoked. It helps you apply for legal status for your spouse and unmarried children who are under 21 at the time you file for asylum. It also, by being granted asylum, you're able to access physical and mental health support, as well as feeling safe of, you know, coming out of the shadows and being who you are openly and freely without fearing, you know, being harmed because of it. You're safe from deportation. And lastly, it is a pathway to citizenship, right? So after you're granted asylum, you can apply for permanent residency, and then lastly, apply for citizenship in the United States. And of course, you know, there are barriers for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers. And this is even before our current administration, there was always barriers. And we'll go over some of those barriers now. So the legal issues, like the law says that you have to file for asylum before 1 year of your last arrival in the United States. Now, we specialize in helping folks that have been here for way more than a year. We have clients that have been here 5, 10, 20 plus years, and they're still eligible to apply for asylum. So there are exceptions to this 1 year rule. And we are not going to go into a lot of details, but there are exceptions to, you know, filing over the 1 year. And that's why it's super important for people to seek legal advice from, you know, accredited organizations or private attorneys, so that you can really see if you're eligible to apply. Don't base, you know, assumptions on what your friends tell you or hear on the street, but it's really important to seek legal advice to see, even if you are in this country for more than a year at this point, whether you're still eligible to apply for asylum. You know, the officers, when you go to your interviews, so when someone applies for asylum, you will have to go before an asylum officer who will adjudicate your case. And in this situation, you know, you have to prove to the officer that that's interviewing you that you are a member of the LGBTQ community. So that may be, you know, a scary process of people questioning who you are and why do I have to answer these questions. Also, asylum approval rate, unfortunately, you know, it does make a difference where you're applying for asylum. Not all asylum offices have the same approval rate. Nationwide, there was a 35.8% approval rate in November of 2024. So we are fortunate enough to be part of the San Francisco jurisdiction where they have higher approval rates for people who are LGBTQ plus. And then lastly, you know, under the Biden administration, there were 2 asylum bans that were enacted that affected people who were entering the southern border starting on May 12, 2023. We're not going to go into the details about what those asylum bans are, but just also like there are ways to overcome those bans. And again, that's why it's super important that you seek legal advice and have a thorough screening to determine whether you're eligible to apply for asylum. There's also social issues. You know, most of our clients, they don't have the support of family members or community members because they're LGBTQ plus. So they face that isolation as well from like immigrant communities. Past and ongoing trauma, you know, despite having left their countries of origin, they still may face discrimination, harassment in the United States. So that also makes it harder for them to feel safe in seeking help sometimes. And lastly, difficulty, self-affirming or coming out of the closet. Some of our clients, are still living with family members who are transphobic, homophobic, and they're still afraid to come out of the closet. So all these things make the process of like reaching out for help or applying for asylum challenging for people. And then there's also mental health issues. The majority of our clients have been diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, or some form of depression. And so asylum process is not an easy process because part of the process will entail you having to go before an immigration officer and telling your story, like what happened to you. And it's not easy to talk about these painful things that have happened in the past. And so sometimes talking about those things can be very, very re-traumatizing. So the asylum process in itself is not an easy process because it puts people in a situation where you're talking to a stranger about some of the most horrible things that might have happened to you in your countries of origin. And then lastly, it's just the intense fear of having to be possibly being deported and having to return to the place where you suffered those abuses and harm. So in addition to that, it's also other barriers that contribute to people not wanting to seek care, not just like immigration help, but also other types of care like medical care, for example. The fear of deportation. The fear of deportation, given this current administration, it's more prominent. People are afraid to seek medical care, thinking that if they go to the doctor and they're undocumented, they're going to be deported. Fear of bureaucracy. People have experienced harm in their countries of origin by even members of, like the police, for example. So it makes the process of trusting the authorities more challenging. Fear of coercion. Like we have clients that have experienced conversion therapy. They've having them take hormones or special pills or herbal remedies to, change who they are. And so it's scary to go and seek help, not knowing that if you're going to experience the same thing here. Difficulty scheduling, some clients express, oh, I just can't take time off work, and it's understandable, but also we notice that, focusing on work is a way to cope and not have to think about things. And so, we try to be very careful about not having clients have to schedule so many appointments and just, making sure they know the expectations ahead of time of what to expect. How long is this process going to take? How many appointments? Fear of hitting fees. Sometimes you don't know, there's no fee transparency. So you're afraid that this is going to be a very expensive process and I'm not going to be able to afford it. Or thankfully here at Oasis, we are now offering all asylum services for free. So clients are not charged for this process. And lastly, there's anxiety of being outed or misgendered, right? Clients sometimes experience, unfortunately, even in the United States, when they go seek medical care, they're misgendered, or they're afraid that they reach out for help and disclose that they're LGBTQ+, that it might get to the wrong people, and then they may experience additional harm or harassment here in the United States. So is it still safe to apply for asylum? And how is the current administration's view on LGBTQ+ people affecting asylum cases? The right to apply for asylum still exists. That has not gone away. Judges have found that in many cases that LGBTQ+ people, including transgender people, qualify for asylum under the law. Only Congress can change the law. And executive orders like the ones that the current administration are signing are not law, but instead wish lists and directives to the executive branch to do certain things. So asylum cannot be ended through an executive order. So reasons to apply for asylum now more than ever. As a reminder, asylum is for people who are afraid to return to their countries of origin because it's not safe for them to do so, whether they've experienced harm in the past or are afraid of experiencing harm in the future. And they should not have to change who they are. So asylum, again, as a reminder, asylum provides protection from deportation. Under our laws, a person cannot be deported from the United States if their asylum case is still pending. 150 days after you file for asylum, you're eligible to apply for a work permit and get a Social Security card to be able to work legally in this country. And applying for asylum gives you documentation that you have permission to remain in this country as long as your case is still pending. So having applied for asylum can be a protection against being detained and being deported. Now I'm going to hand it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Mari. Thanks everyone for having us. So now I'm going to go into the more frustrating, sad, and depressing things that are happening. So how the current administration is attacking both immigrants and LGBTQ people, especially transgender, non-binary, and intersex people, and why our clients, LGBTQ immigrants, are at this intersection and feeling doubly impacted. Immediately after Inauguration Day, after January 20th, we saw very coordinated attacks on immigrants and asylum seekers. And one of the first things that happened was that executive orders were signed. And so, like Mari explained, executive orders are not law. It's something that the president can sign that tells the executive branch, which is the branch of our government that the president controls. So it's a directive to do certain things. It is not changing the law. It can't change the Constitution. So if an executive order conflicts or is opposed by a current law, then the law is going to take precedent, or the law is going to control, not the executive order. So that can be important to remember as we look at the news and see all of these executive orders being signed. So on January 20th, a number of executive orders were signed. So one was about asylum. So it basically closed the border to asylum seekers, meaning that people who presented themselves at the border between the US and Mexico, throughout our history, if people present themselves in this way and ask for asylum, they are oftentimes allowed to come into the country because asylum is a human right. And we've signed many treaties with other countries saying that we will protect asylum seekers and give them safe haven, but now that's being ignored. So asylum seekers are not being allowed to enter the United States to pursue their asylum case. And the executive order used a lot of racist language about why it was closing the border to asylum seekers, including language about there being an invasion. The executive order also directed Department of Homeland Security to reenact the Remain in Mexico policy, which happened during the first administration, where asylum seekers were forced to remain in Mexico while their asylum cases were pending, which caused a lot of people to become victims of crime and violence and kidnapping in Mexico. They were being targeted because they were asylum seekers. The executive order also directed to the executive branch to use the military, both in immigration enforcement along the border and also within the United States. And we're seeing that in the news, that the military is being asked to use their planes or military personnel to do immigration enforcement. There are also executive orders about terminating parole programs. So under the Biden administration, many people were able to enter the United States from Venezuela, from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Haiti, because of kind of the dire conditions in those countries. And so parole was offered as a way for people to migrate safely to the US and then apply for asylum once they were here. So the current administration has terminated or is seeking to terminate these parole programs and have entered regulations in order to do so. The executive orders also touched on TPS, which is temporary protected status, which is another way that people who come from places where there are natural disasters or other dangerous conditions happening, they're able to stay in the United States because it would be unsafe for them to return. The executive orders also put a freeze on refugee resettlement in the United States. So refugees who were already in the process of coming to the United States were prohibited from boarding planes or entering the country. And it also says that the US will no longer accept refugees. So Mani and Lena talked a little bit about kind of how we use the definition of a refugee to talk about who qualifies for asylum. So by not allowing refugees into the United States, that means that there are people outside of the United States whose lives are in danger, and they're not able to come to the United States and be safe. The executive orders also targeted birthright citizenship and is an attempt to end birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship is a right that is listed and stated in the Constitution. So we saw people file lawsuits against this particular executive order, and these lawsuits have been successful in preventing the end of birthright citizenship. The executive orders also called for increased use of detention in the United States, so seeking to detain more people. And then finally, the executive orders called for increased vetting of immigration applications, including asylum applications, including green card applications, citizenship applications, meaning that each application is going to go through more security checks so that people will be scrutinized more. And this will really result in huge delays so that people who have applied for immigration status and are eligible for immigration status will have to wait much longer before they receive decisions. So this again is a way to slow down the process and prevent people from receiving immigration benefits. Also in January, Congress, under kind of the directive and order of the president, passed the Laken Riley Act, which calls for the mandatory detention of immigrants who have been arrested or convicted of theft-related crimes. So this is a huge expansion on who has to be detained. And it's not just people who were convicted or found guilty of theft-related crimes, it's anyone who has been arrested. So this will put many, many more people in danger, and many more people will be subject to detention because of this. And the list keeps going. So the expansion of expedited removal, this was attempted during the first administration and was struck down by the courts. They are again trying to do this. Again, groups have sued. We're still waiting on a decision from the court. But expedited removal historically is a way for immigration to deport people without giving them a full hearing in immigration court. So that's why it's called expedited. It speeds up the deportation process. So historically, expedited removal could only be applied to people who had been in the US for less than 2 weeks and were within 100 miles of the border. But under the current administration, they want to expand that. So they want to make it apply to anyone who has been in the US for less than 2 years. And they want to make it apply to anyone found anywhere in the United States. So again, another tool to increase detention and deportation of immigrants. And we have heard stories of people being subject or having expedited removal apply to them, even if they entered on parole. So even if they were given permission to enter the country, and also on people who are already in removal proceedings. So this is all illegal, but the administration is using illegal means to achieve their goals. But again, lawsuits have been filed, which is the good news, and it's kind of what gives us hope right now. Another thing that is very scary for our clients and immigrant communities is the alien registration requirement, which goes into effect supposedly this Friday. Again, another lawsuit has been filed, so we're waiting for the outcome of that. But basically, under a very old regulation that was written into our law during World War II. It basically requires people who, came into the country without permission and are here without permission. It forces them to have to register with the government. Our government currently says that starting on April 11th, there will be an online form that people must fill out. And if people are caught and have not filled this out, they can be subject to criminal prosecution. The penalties are misdemeanors, so they're not felonies. So Oasis and many of our immigration partners really see this as a way to, again, increase enforcement so that it will be used as an enforcement tool to target undocumented people. So if this requirement applies to you, it's really important to not register and not, fill out this online form until you have spoken to an immigration attorney, because there can be very serious consequences and risks for registering. You're giving the government your information, like your name and where you live. So again, it's really important to consult with an immigration attorney before completing this form. And then we are seeing, huge human rights violations. So we're seeing people who were granted protection by immigration judges. So they're granted something called withholding of removal, which means that an immigration judge has found that they cannot be returned to their country of origin because their lives would be in danger if they are. So people were being deported not to their country of origin, but to a third country that the U.S. has made agreements with. And so that, again, is in violation of the law, because people need to have a chance to say whether or not they would be safe in that third country before the government sends them there. So we saw that there is a group of asylum seekers who was sent to Panama, and they're still there. People were being, sent to other places without any notice and without the right to contest that removal. We also know that the government is sending folks to Guantanamo, especially people from Venezuela. They're making baseless allegations that people are part of a gang based on just, the fact that they have tattoos. People are also being sent to a mega prison in El Salvador, again on these baseless allegations that they are part of the Tren de Aragua gang. And so this issue is being litigated. The ACLU is one of the people that have sued the government to stop these deportations. And there was a Supreme Court ruling that said that yes, the people who are being deported this way do have a right to contest what's happening, but that the original lawsuit was filed in the wrong court. So now they have to start all over again and file in a different court. So it's a lot of different legal wrangling, but again, the good thing is that there are organizations and people standing up and suing against these illegal things that are happening. And then finally, wanted to touch on kind of the targeted detentions and visa revocations of student activists. So we saw this happen to a Colombian student from Columbia University in New York who supported Palestine. A lot of this is students supporting Palestine, and they're being targeted by the government for things that are covered under free speech. So again, people are suing. So those are kind of a very quick rundown of what's happening and the attacks on immigrants, but at the same time, we know there's also been attacks on transgender, non-binary, and intersex folks as well. So again, on January 20th, one of the executive orders that was signed had a really awful name that I won't repeat, but it was basically trying, it's imposing a very transphobic view of the world, that there are only two biological sexes, male and female, and that the federal government is only going to recognize two biological sexes. So it's really an attempt to erase transgender, non-binary, and intersex folks. The implications for immigrants is that now USCIS, which is one of the immigration agencies, they are the agency that issues work permits and issues green cards. So they will now stop issuing cards according to someone's gender marker and will only issue documents according to someone's sex assigned at birth. So even if someone has gone to court and changed and updated their gender marker, so that it's actually their true, affirming gender, USCIS immigration will not be respecting that and will be instead imposing this idea that all that matters is your sex assigned at birth. It also took away the X gender marker option that the Biden administration had put in place in 2023. So the implications for folks like our clients is huge, because now they can't get a work permit that affirms their true gender identity. They might have a mismatch between their work permit and their California ID, and that can be used, or that can out them as someone who is transgender, putting people in danger. The Department of State has also implemented this two biological sexes rule for passports. So passports will be issued not according to someone's gender marker, but according to their sex assigned at birth, even if they have done a legal gender marker update. So that was all very depressing. I apologize. But so me and Muddy wanted to go over kind of what's giving us hope right now. So over 40 immigration-related lawsuits have been filed by a variety of different law firms and organizations. Plaintiffs are standing up, they're stepping forward, they're being brave, and people are standing up in a lot of different ways. 12 lawsuits have been filed in support of the TGNCI community, which is really important. You might have seen lawsuits against, the administration trying to ban trans people in the military, or trying to move trans people or trans women to men's prisons, which puts them at extreme danger. So far, all those transfers of trans women have been stopped, and the military ban has been stopped. And then we see a lot of activism from states. So states like California, New York, Massachusetts have sued on behalf of immigrants and TGNCI folks as well, in the realm of, making sure people have access to Medicare, making sure transgender folks have access to gender affirming health care. We see people standing up and affirming, sanctuary status as cities and as states. And then we saw that last weekend, over 600,000 people across the United States protested against, the variety of the administration's harmful and dangerous policies. And then on a more personal note for us at Oasis, since January this year, we've had 21, now 22 of our clients have been granted asylum. So we're very excited for them. These are clients who have waited years and years and years because of huge immigration backlogs, and they finally received the chance to present their asylum case and were granted asylum and now have safety to be in the United States and are on the pathway to apply to citizenship if that's what they choose to do. So we want to make sure that everyone understands how we can protect ourselves and our communities. And so if you are an impacted person, if you are undocumented, or if you want to be a strong ally, we're going to present kind of a brief Know Your Rights review. So I always ask this at Know Your Rights presentations, just kind of how many people think that everyone, regardless of immigration status, has rights under the Constitution. And I get sometimes hands, sometimes people like, I'm not sure, but I want everyone to know that everyone has rights under our Constitution, regardless of their immigration status. So if you are undocumented, if you are a green card holder, if you are an asylum seeker, if you are here on a student visa, everyone has the right to remain silent. We have the right to not incriminate ourselves, is another way to say it. So we don't have to answer questions about where we're from or if we have immigration status in the United States. We have the right to remain silent, and we have the right to not answer questions. We also have the right to refuse to sign documents or hand over documents. So this is important because a lot of times when ICE encounters someone, they try to convince someone to sign a piece of paper agreeing to be deported or removed from the country. So if you find yourself detained by ICE, arrested by ICE, it's really important to not sign anything until you are able to speak to an attorney, because we know that, the truth isn't always being told by the people who are arresting and detaining immigrants. And so you don't ever want to sign anything without first having a chance to have an immigration attorney review it and explain what it means to you. Also, a lot of times the documents are in English and people aren't given a translation of the documents in the language they speak. We all also have the right to refuse law enforcement from entering our house or our private business without a warrant. So this is also very important. And we learned during the first administration that this makes it extremely difficult for ICE to arrest and detain people. And people really learned that and really exercised this right. And so many people were protected because they knew not to let ICE into their house without a valid warrant. And we'll talk a little bit about this on the next slide too. And then finally, we have the right to not have our belongings searched in most situations. So, we can't have officers search our bag unless they have a certain amount of suspicion, but they can't just approach us on the street and grab our bag and start looking through it. So that's another thing where you have the right to say, I do not consent for you to look through my pockets, or I don't consent for you to look through my bag, etc. So just emphasizing, we never want to open the door, whether it's our house or our private business, without seeing a judicial warrant. So there's some QR codes here that have more information, including what a judicial warrant looks like. And a lot of times ICE will have something called an administrative warrant, which is not a warrant signed by a judge. It's just signed by an ICE officer. And it's basically like a request, like we would like to arrest this person. But that does not give them the right to enter a house or enter a business. The only way they can do that is through a signed warrant by a judge. And that warrant needs to have the person's name on it, spelled correctly. It needs to have the correct address on it. It will usually have the name of the court that the judge is in, and will be signed by a judge. So I encourage people to use those QR codes to look at examples. Again, we want to stay silent because any information we give can be used against us. We have the right to speak to a lawyer. Unlike in criminal proceedings where a lawyer is paid for by the government, in immigration proceedings, you yourself have to pay for the lawyer, but you do have a right to speak with one. And again, don't sign any documents because we don't know what they say and we're not necessarily going to be told the truth. And these are some advice. This is some advice for interactions with ICE or the police. So don't lie, because when someone lies, that can be used against them and that can be grounds for being arrested or detained. Same with running away or resisting. So if we run away when we see ICE or the police, they can argue that that is suspicious and therefore they had reason to detain or arrest you. So remain calm, don't answer questions, don't consent to having your bag searched or your pocket searched. You don't also have to be fingerprinted. It can be helpful. This is especially good for allies or people who are witnessing an interaction with ICE and someone. If you note the names of the officers, the date and time it happened, and other details, that can be really helpful information that that person's lawyer can use to try to get them out of immigration detention. So you can, if you are being detained, you can ask, am I free to go? The officer will either say yes, and in that case, you can walk away. If they say no, that means you are being detained. And so that is when you want to use your right to not answer any questions. And the QR code on this slide has many different languages. And one of the things that keeps getting brought up on these slides is something called a red card. And a red card, we can send the link around later, but it's a little card and it has kind of a list of our constitutional rights on it. And so instead of speaking or instead of having to say like, I don't want to answer your questions, it's a card that we can give to an ICE officer or a police officer that it invokes or, lets the officer know that we don't want to speak to them. And we're going to use our constitutional right to remain silent or and also not have them search our house or our car, etc. So a lot of times we get questions from clients and from other community members of what documents should I carry? So one thing that's important to carry is if you have a work permit, to carry your work permit. If you're worried about it getting lost, you can carry a copy. You can carry a receipt notice. So when you apply for asylum, you get a receipt from immigration saying that your application is pending. And on that receipt, it says that you have permission to be in the United States until your case has been decided. So that can be a powerful document to carry with you because it can show an ICE officer that you have permission to be in the United States. Green card holders are also required to carry their green card with them. So these are people with lawful permanent residency. And again, if people are afraid of losing it, you can carry a copy. We recommend to not carry a passport or an ID card from another country, because if the ICE officer does end up searching you and they find that you have a foreign passport, they can use that as a reason why they suspect that you're undocumented, and that can lead them to detain you for longer or even arrest you. So it's important to get something like, if you can get it, like a California driver's license. Undocumented people can apply for driver's licenses in California, a work permit, maybe you have a library card, any other type of ID, a school ID that doesn't indicate that it's from another country. And then it's really important to not carry false documents or documents that belong to another country, because it can be a crime to possess those things. And if a officer finds them, that can mean that they do have the right to detain and arrest you. This is more information on how to prepare. So some family and general preparedness toolkits. So if we have children, we can understand, how to put plans in place in case we do get detained, and we want to make sure our children are protected, what documents to prepare in advance, kind of information to give family members and friends of finding a lawyer who could help you, or how people can find you if you've been detained. And then in the Bay Area and in other parts of California and the country, there are rapid response hotlines, which are dedicated phone numbers that have been set up by a collaboration of lawyers and community organizations. And so if you see ICE activity, you can call the hotline to report it, and the people from the hotline will go out to investigate and to kind of report back of like, yes, there was ICE activity, or no, this was a false alarm. So it's a good way to kind of make sure we're not spreading misinformation around the community, because we know that people are really, really scared now for good reason. So false reports of ICE can make people scared to leave their house, make folks scared to have their kids go to school, make folks scared to go to work. So we want to make sure we all have accurate information. The rapid response hotline is also important to call if you have a loved one or community member that was detained, because they can provide lawyers who will go to the detention center to advocate for the person's release. So it kind of is emergency legal services to make sure the person does not get reported. So there is a list there of the rapid response hotlines through that QR code. So we talked about earlier that there is something called expanded expedited removal that the administration is using to try to detain and deport as many people as possible. So if we have been in the United States for more than 2 years, it can be important to carry evidence of that, because one of the things we can, if it looks like we are going to be arrested, and detained and taken somewhere, we can show that evidence to say, I, have been here for longer than 2 years. I want, I have the right to appear before an immigration court judge and have an immigration court hearing. So that can be an important piece of evidence. Perhaps that's, a piece of mail from 2 years ago. Again, like a library card that was issued 2 years ago, a state ID that was issued 2 years ago, a medical record if you feel comfortable, having that medical record, a student, like a school record, etc. We always want to try to remain silent, not answer questions, but if we have been detained, if we have been arrested and we're going to be, and it looks like things are happening and we might, be detained or deported, stating that we have a fear of returning to our country of origin is a way to protect ourselves from deportation, because under the law, people who have a credible fear of returning to their country of origin should not be deported. So we know that the administration is not always following the law, but stating that fear loudly and clearly at every opportunity can provide protection from deportation, especially for LGBTQ folks. If you feel comfortable, it can be important to say why you are scared. So I'm afraid to return to my country of origin because I'm gay, and I'm very scared that people will hurt me because I'm gay. So that was a very quick Know Your Rights presentation. I encourage, the slides will be distributed, so I really encourage people to use the QR codes to get more resources and to read up more. One of the things that can really help during this time is to reach out and do something and be part of a community that is standing up. So these are 3 ways that if you are a community member and want to be a strong ally, you can do this at this time. So at Oasis, mental health evaluations can be a really strong piece of our clients' asylum cases. They can explain why someone wasn't able to apply within their first year in the United States. And it can explain how the trauma they experienced in their home country or in the US have affected them. So if you are a licensed mental health provider, you're an LMFT, a psychologist, an LCSW, reach out. We always are looking for volunteers who can provide these sort of evaluations. We are also always looking for volunteers to do administrative work or to interpret for our clients. And then if you're a licensed attorney or law student, you can represent asylum seekers at their asylum interviews. And then if you are a service provider and coming into contact with undocumented folks, especially undocumented LGBTQ+ folks, please refer them for consultations. This can be one of the most important things, is to connect people with legal services so they understand their eligibility for asylum and other immigration relief and can take the steps to apply in order to keep themselves safe. This is how you can reach us. Probably the best way is to email us at info@oasislegalservices.org, or through our website, you can request a consultation. We get a ton of phone calls, so probably text is also a better way than calling, but we also do take phone calls. So if you're a service provider and want to refer a client, providing us, their name, their contact information, that they are affirmatively part of the LGBTQ community, and then getting their permission before you send their information to us. And then we also have a lot of resources on our website for LGBTQ plus immigrants and asylum seekers. And then to volunteer, we have another form that you can fill out on our website. And then this is exciting, but we are having an asylum clinic for residents of Santa Clara County next Tuesday, April 15th. And this is specifically for LGBTQ plus immigrants who are in immigration court, so whose case has been filed in immigration court. And this is to help people file their asylum applications. So there's still room in the clinic. So if you or someone you know would benefit from this, please reach out. You can reach out through the phone number or through our website. And we're trying to reach as many people as possible because, again, submitting that asylum application provides really strong protection from deportation. It also then starts the person on the process of getting a work permit. And then finally here are me and Muddy's emails. Thank you all so much. I see we have one open question. I'll read it, but it says, any advice for students, folks here on a visa who are supporting Palestine? What should people say if ICE or other government agents of the state come around and claim this is grounds for deportation? So what we are advising people to do is to really scrub their social media, because USCIS just announced today that they will be scrutinizing people's social media for quote unquote anti-Semitism. And so that is one thing that they're going to use to try to kind of go after people. So erasing social media accounts, not having an online presence can be important. If ICE or other government agents come and say this is grounds for deportation, I think remaining silent is really important, kind of all the know your rights things that we discussed earlier. If people are worried, they should contact an immigration attorney in advance so that they know someone that they can call if this happens to them and can receive support. Or, alerting a loved one or community member that this is something that they're fearful of, and kind of working out a preparedness plan in advance can be really important. And if there's any other questions, folks are welcome to raise their hand and we can take you off mute, or put questions in the Q&A.
I also, again, thank you. Well, first, thank you so much for this presentation and covering this important information right now. I also wanted to check in with y'all to see if we wanted to stop the recording right now to open up fully for Q&A. Okay, so I'll
Yeah, I
go
think that
ahead.
would be great.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and stop the recording right now.